Welcome back to CyHawk Talk here on a Sunday. Iowa State continues to climb the polls. Iowa getting a couple more votes, and maybe they'll end up back in the top 25 here soon. It's a great Sunday, though. It's a beautiful day here in the Hawkeye State, which is a little bit of a cyclone state this year, but the official nickname is Hawkeye. Ben, how are you doing on a beautiful Sunday?
I'm well, Ethan. It's super windy in Ames. Right now I can hear it rattle in the tree outside my window. But I don't think the Cyclones minded too much if it slowed the flight up on the way back. I think that was probably a pretty good plane flight back from Morgantown last night.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. But let's start with the earlier game in the day, Iowa-Washington. Were you able to catch any of that game, or am I going to need to do a quick recap?
I watched most of it, Ethan, and my big takeaway was is the Iowa offense back? Help me out.
Yeah, I mean, they're not playing as good a defense as they had last week against Ohio State. No disrespect to the Huskies, but maybe Ohio State recruiting from a different kind of pool of athlete than Washington or Iowa might have access to. So I think that had a little bit more to do with it than anything. Still not in a super impressive day passing wise, but still they were able to have the 33-yard touchdown pass, the second play of the fourth quarter on offense for Dayton Howard to get his first career reception for the touchdown. So you certainly saw things that were more promising, and Caleb Johnson continued to be the kind of guy who can power the offense. And again, how much can we take away from a game where the running, how much can we take away from the passing attack when the running game is doing what it was doing? I mean, you can rip off a 53-yard run right before the half. Why risk it by putting the ball in the air when Caleb Johnson can do that and get into field goal range anyway? So it's just been a really interesting offense to evaluate. I don't think they're all the way there yet in terms of their timing. I think the passing game is still a work in progress. Kirk Ferentz said as much in the post game. So I still think that there's stuff to work on. I tweeted out during the second half, and I think I updated it in the third quarter, or I tweeted in the second quarter, updated in the third quarter. But Iowa is not producing off turnovers right now. They're averaging under 3 points per turnover against FBS opponents. And I feel like you want to come away with better than a field goal when you come away with a turnover. And right now they're averaging worse than a field goal, which is just not going to cut it. It was a huge issue against Ohio State. They did it again on Saturday against Washington in the second quarter. But that field goal ended up being kind of what turned the tide in favor of Iowa. So it's kind of a tough eval there again. And I actually wrote this as one of my takeaways, but I felt like I was nitpicking a little bit because they won by 24. It's like I can't kill them for winning by 24. I mean, they just beat the brakes off this team that was in the national championship, beat a 10 win or beat a top 10 team last week. And I'm talking about how terrible they are. It's like it kind of feels like a little ridiculousness to be nitpicky about that. So I'd say that's like my all-encompassing thoughts on the game.
For sure. I mean, when you look at kind of the early season losses, and maybe some people kind of gave up a little bit on this season or what it was going to be like, but we've talked about it, Ethan. 12-team playoff, Big Ten, a lot still on the table for Iowa. I wanted to ask one thing. Saw McNamara had those two touchdown passes. Is that stat right? I saw something floating around. He hadn't thrown a touchdown against a Power Five team since he did it against Iowa. What's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, he missed most of the conference slate last year. They didn't need him to beat Iowa State last year. They had a couple of big runs. They had a pick six from Sebastian Castro. So really relied on the defense and the ground game a lot like they are this year, last year to beat Iowa State. And then he ended up getting hurt and missed most of conference play. I think he only played the Penn State game last year and they got shut out in that game. So it's just kind of the way it's gone for him at Iowa that stat works out the way it is. Um, I mean, he got hurt early in his last season at Michigan, missing most of conference play. Didn't get an opportunity to throw a touchdown pass against Power Four opponents. Then comes to Iowa, gets hurt before conference play, doesn't really get an opportunity to throw a touchdown pass against Power Four competition, and then has a slow start in a new offense this year. So it's just, I mean, the chips fell perfectly for Cade to not have that opportunity. It's a wild stat. maybe a little bit misleading though.
That's why it does so well on Twitter. Those misleading kind of wild stats are the ones that kind of circulate a little bit for sure.
Yeah, it's like screenshotting a run play. It's like, why didn't this guy fill this hole? It's like, well, if you can't see the giant linebacker that's being covered up by this offensive lineman in the picture, that would have just absolutely destroyed him. Um, Maybe not if he's Action Jackson, Jalen Jackson, but uh, let's use that as a transition to your game to talk a little bit about what allowed Iowa State to escape what a lot of people thought was going to be a trap game in Morgantown.
Yeah, Action Jackson. That's certainly the nickname that the Fox broadcast was given Jalen Jackson. And they were hammering it. So I think it's probably going to stick. But Jalen Jackson actually wasn't kind of the primary running back last night for the Cyclones, which is crazy from everything we've been talking about on CyHawk Talk. But last night was the night of Carson Hansen, the running back who had 3 touchdowns and toted the ball really efficiently. I think maybe this is a case of Matt Campbell kind of simply riding the hot hand. I mean, Henson looked good all game. He covers the ball up so well. He gets his pad level low. And he was effective all game. So I do think it's going to be a true kind of rotation as Campbell looks to go with the hot hand and keep everyone fresh for later in the season. Abu Sama started the game and he had a couple carries, early, but didn't do much for the rest of the game. So certainly something to monitor there with the running back situation. But all in all, Ethan, it was a really impressive 28-16 win for the Cyclones. It started off a lot like the Baylor game last year, where the Mountaineers got the ball. Hey, we want the ball. We'll take the ball and go march 75 yards down the field, right up the throat of this Iowa State defense. It raised a lot of alarm bells, right? Iowa State is missing a lot of linebackers. Brzezina's out. They had to burn Jack Sadowski's red shirt just because they needed bodies in there. And Jacob Ellis, the freshman who got the start in place of all these injured guys, he got hurt too. So it was not a great sign when West Virginia went right down the field and scored. But Iowa State didn't flinch. Rocco Becht got the ball back. He didn't score on that drive, but he was a steadying presence and led the Cyclones to a second half or a first half lead. That was just really impressive.
Yeah, and looking at the two games, they kind of started similarly in that Iowa got the ball first against Washington, but Washington had a big long drive. Didn't end up getting any points out of it, but you kind of felt early in both of those games that the Hawkeyes and the Cyclones were maybe a little bit they were going to be in a dogfight is kind of what it felt like. And then the final scores didn't really indicate a dogfight. They were kind of like, oh, these teams kind of won handedly. But I, when it came to the Iowa Washington game, it never felt like Iowa was in control until they scored those 2 early touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And then it was like, okay, now this game's over. But it felt like a game up until that point. Was there a point like that in the Iowa State game where it just kind of felt like it was a dogfight, and then all of a sudden Iowa State was up by 3 scores, and it was like, oh, they're kind of running away with this now?
Yeah, you mentioned those 2 late touchdowns for the Hawkeyes. Iowa State had 2 late interceptions on Garrett Green that I think kind of officially put this game to bed. But Ethan, I'll give you the moment where I think the game flipped. In the first quarter, West Virginia, as I said, gets the ball, scores on a touchdown drive, and then Iowa State misses a field goal. So West Virginia has the ball back again at the Cyclone 21-yard line, threatening to go up 2 scores. And Jeremiah Cooper, the Cyclone defensive back, kind of makes a great play, playing through the whistle, extra effort. We've heard it all the way from middle school. Football coaches talking about, continue punching at that ball until the play is over. And Jeremiah Cooper did that to force a stop on third down. The West Virginia Mountaineers missed the ensuing field goal attempt, and 4 minutes of real time after Jeremiah Cooper punched that ball away, Rocco Becht burned him over the top for a 60-yard touchdown pass to Jalen Knoll on a busted coverage. So the game really flipped in a span of 4 minutes, all because of a big hustle play by Jeremiah Cooper.
Got to imagine a bounce back play like that was pretty cathartic for him after missing the tackle on the initial touchdown drive for West Virginia. I'd be curious what his thoughts were. I'm pretty sure you wrote a story about this play, though. Is that correct?
I did, Ethan. I called it kind of the overlooked play that really changed the game. Because as you said, you just look at these 2 games box scores and you think, oh, kind of easy flowing, for both teams in the state. And no, it wasn't that way at all. So this was kind of the unheralded moment, I thought, that really changed the game. And if we're going to talk about maybe what changed the game, we got to talk about Rocco Becht. Just a big night for him with his dad, of course, Anthony, going into the West Virginia Ring of Honor. My takeaway from that was the leadership and maturity Becht showed. Matt Campbell even kind of said, hey, this is a situation, a lot's going on for this kid. His family's in town, huge family day, where he could have gotten distracted earlier in the week. And Rocco wasn't distracted at all. I thought he was the steadying force in this game for the Cyclones. And Matt Campbell said, there's nobody I'd rather have leading the Cyclones than Rocco Becht.
We're going to get into our ending segment, our closing segment here of the show. We're going to do the playoff-ometer, where Ben and I try and gauge where these two teams, the Cyclones and the Hawkeyes, are at in terms of their likelihood of making the college football playoff. It's expanded, like Ben mentioned earlier in the show, to 12 teams, opening the door for, some of these higher end Power 4 teams, but maybe a step down from the Alabamas, the Ohio States of the world, to get into the playoff. Ben, we'll start with you. You've been on the eyes. Was last night's win enough to move them up to the lock emoji, or are we still on the eyes?
Ethan, I think they're moving past the eyes. I said I really want to see what this Cyclone team will do in a hostile road environment against a West Virginia team that had been running the ball down opponents' throats, over 200 yards the last two games. And the Cyclones' defense, offense, special teams, all I thought played really well. And Cyclones are number 9 in the nation. I think I'm going to move them closer to the lock. Maybe a better emoji would be kind of the thumbs up, because Iowa State, I'd say their chances to do something like that are kind of like this, Ethan. Iowa State is they don't have BYU on the schedule, as you look at one of the teams nobody thought about as a power in the Big 12 before the season, now kind of becoming a problem. But Utah, that game at the end of the season is not as scary. I don't know, Ethan. I think the Cyclones showed me something on Saturday that I'm not watching anymore. I'm kind of thumbs up on their chances.
Could set up a pretty interesting Big 12 championship if both BYU and Iowa State were able to stay undefeated until that point, where you could have a game where both teams are going to get in no matter what the outcome is, as long as one team doesn't beat the other by 50 and make the other one look really bad. So I mean, could be a perfect case scenario for the Big 12 to get a couple of teams into the college football playoff with the way that those two teams are playing right now.
How about you, Ethan? What's the emoji? What's the feel in the Hawkeye camp about the playoff-ometer chances?
I mean, Coach Ferentz said it before taking our questions yesterday. Feeling is night and day coming out of the Washington win compared to the Ohio State loss. And I think that's just kind of what top tier teams will do to you. They'll kind of just demoralize you a little bit. And so I'd love to move them beyond the grimace, teeth emoji, but I don't think I can. It's just that was their last chance for a real marquee win. Given that they didn't beat Iowa State, that was a close game, and I'm sure it'll look good on a resume as a close loss if it's splitting hairs between them and like a 3-loss team at number 13 at the end of the season. But it's the resume is going to be really bland outside of that. It's like, wow, they lost their the two best teams they played this year. They lost to both of them. So I think we're going to be probably trapped at the grimace for the rest of the year, unless Cade McNamara turns into a Heisman favorite in the last 6 games of the season. So we're going to keep it on the grimace.
Yeah, and of course that kind of late night result, crazy game, Oregon beating Ohio State, doesn't necessarily make the Hawkeyes record or resume any better.
I mean, are we really going to kill Ohio State for a 1-point loss where they had a chance if, Will Howard has an extra second on the clock and, time management goes a little bit better for him? I mean, I'm not going to kill him for that.
I know, but I mean, you got to bump him down, right? Somebody's got to get credit for that win. And maybe in a committee where all those guys sit back and, 7 weeks from now or whenever they decide it won't be as fresh in the memory.
If you're gonna come at me with that, let's wait until Ohio State loses to my alma mater next week and Nebraska shocks the country. Let's wait for that. Let's wait for that take until next Sunday, And if not, I'll eat crow on the next Sunday Rewind.
That's
How's that sound?
spicy. That's spicy.
All right, this has been CyHawk Talk. We'll be back on Wednesday with some storylines from both the Cyclones and Hawkeyes. Maybe Ben's got a cool assignment coming up today. Maybe he'll have some storylines to talk about from. But that'll do it for today's show. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I forgot to say that on Wednesday. Sorry, Mom. We'll see you guys next time.